And your point is well taken. On my Facebook page, I posted the very thing you're talking about regarding the dining, and people went wild over it. I mean, it's very clearly something people are concerned and should be concerned about. And this goes back to the original point of why you and I are talking here today. I think there's a narrative out there, no matter what is behind it, there is a narrative which people are dissuaded from pursuing. And that is the narrative of truth, trying to find out what exactly happened. There's this alternate history that's been put forward by the 9/11 Commission, which clearly states, and their bottom line is 9/11 was not preventable, and we just have to accept that fact. Well, I argue that fact to the point of being blue in the face. I think that is just flat out.
Well, they started with the preset statement that this was not preventable, and we're not going to look at how this happened. We're going to look at what we should do, and the answer is a police state.
Well, and to back you up on that a little bit here too, just look at what happened over the last 2 days, Alex, with Leon Panetta over at CIA, and tragically there was 7 CIA officers and 2 guards lost last year at Camp Chapman, and the answer there, and I'm just baffled by this, is Leon Panetta's comments as director of CIA. Well, mistakes were made, but we're not going to fire anybody. So, you got to ask yourself, why would people like me get fired over, trivial allegations which didn't stand up to any legal process, that I'd actually lose my clearance and my job over, while others who, literally allow tragedies to happen where loss of life are the prime outcome and nothing ever happens bad. I'm fascinated by the disparity of the standards within our own government.
Well, remember the record up until that time in 2001, the record FBI bonuses were given to the specific leadership that blocked all of the good FBI people who were on the hijackers nationwide.
Right. And I think that's a point well taken. And I'd like your listeners to understand that there are still good people in the government. It's just that they are often ridiculed, set aside, limited, they're put in places of limited scope because of the fact that people like me like stirring trouble up. And trouble to them is just getting your job done.
Well, Colonel Shaffer, I mean, look, yeah. I've got a lot of family who's been in the Army. And almost anyone I've talked to who's been in the Army in my family, the CIA tried to recruit them. And one of them was recruited and got out of it because he just says it was completely criminal stuff inside the U.S., drugs, you name it, in Chicago. And, the CIA is constantly getting caught with airplanes crashing full of cocaine. I mean, my whole issue is we know the government's got a lot of good people in it on the light side, but you've got the dark side that basically operates as a mafia. And, I mean, there needs to be an investigation of why one of the top al-Qaeda masterminds, the government tells us, Anwar al-Awlaki, is hanging out with the top brass 2 months after 9/11. I mean, that's a big deal.
And I think there needs to be an entire relook, at least in the defense side of the very issue. I mean, I support a lot of folks that you and I both have friends on Facebook. They have all called for a new investigation. I support that. But if nothing else, we've got to call into account for these actions you just mentioned. I mean, why on earth would you have done this? There's other things regarding al-Awlaki which are still very peculiar, I'll say that, without getting into something too dramatic, as well as the 9/11 issues regarding Able Danger. I mean, it's one of those situations where, it's very clear that I hit a sore spot again by merely putting, and your listeners, I hope they will go out and pick the book up at some point, Dark Heart, by the fact that I go through in painful detail to give the reader a good understanding of what happened in that room when I mentioned Able Danger to Dr. Philip Zelikow. And Alex, I hope you understand, I went in there with as many facts that could be verified as possible so that he could leave that room and go back to the United States and pursue getting the document, getting the information necessary. And of course, one of the big mysteries, and this was something I will talk about because I had to threaten the DOD editors when we went through my book again in early September, that they actually tried to pull a paragraph out where I talk about the fact the Defense Intelligence Agency allowed my 9/11 Able Danger documents to go missing. And I had to threaten them. I said, look, I'm not standing, this is it. You can pull a lot of crap out, but this is the deal. The moment you start pulling information out, which relates directly to my congressional testimony, you may do that, but you will lose by the fact that I will just stick a copy of my testimony in the back of the book and people will still see it. So you've got to wonder why, we're talking about information which in some cases is over 10 years old. The disclosure was made in 2003. Why would they be interested in redacting information relating to that meeting if they're not concerned about it? So
well, for those that don't know, and it's all in the book, Dark Heart, but I mean, Tell us, I mean, what did Zelikow, I mean, what did you say to him about Able Danger that freaked him out?
Well, it was, we were all in this room. This is October 2003 in a combat zone. And Zelikow, Dr. Zelikow and three other of his staff were actually at Bagram doing kind of a whirlwind tour of the combat zone, trying to find people who had pre-9/11 intelligence that had not been previously provided to them. Essentially, I think it was a very wise move to go out and just kind of, go out into the bush and see what you find from knocking some rocks over. With that said, I don't think they really wanted to find out what was under those rocks based on what happened. During this meeting, I had a full hour to brief him. At the end of about a 40-minute briefing, where I did a point paper and laid out to him the full scope of a clandestine human intelligence operation relating to Able Danger, as well as the Able Danger project itself. And at the end of that hour, there was just stunned silence. And I talked about the fact that we discovered the 9/11 hijackers, at least four of them, basically who were in two of the three cells which conducted the successful 9/11 attacks. And most notably, at the end of the meeting, after everybody was getting ready to leave, Zelikow comes up to me, presents his card to me, and says, "What you've said today is critically important. I need you to come see me when you return to the United States after your tour here in Afghanistan." So that was the result. Zelikow being just, I can honestly say, I think there was a moment of being stunned by his entire staff and everybody in the room by the fact that talked about our finding Mohammed Atta and the other hijackers in our data mining effort to target Al-Qaeda. And there was no doubt of his concern because he personally later admitted, right before my hearings in 2006, that yes, they did go back and check on Able Danger, but according to them, the Pentagon only gave them two briefcase container-sized things, and there was nothing in them. And this is the peculiar thing, Alex. They've already figured out now the Pentagon's lied to them about a number of things relating to the attack, the NORAD issues and some other things. But for some reason, Zelikow still backs the Pentagon on this one issue, saying, "Oh no, we're sure that the Pentagon is telling us the truth." So anyone who's been around Washington any length of time understands the moment someone does something like that, where they've been lied to multiple times, but this one thing they're telling the truth on, they feel they're telling the truth on, that means there's something there. And I think your listeners are very intelligent and can figure out for themselves that there's some reason they don't want this to be talked about, and they're continuing this effort to suppress me and what I talk about as best they can. And I think in this case, with my book, it backfired on them.
Well, absolutely. And Colonel, I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but it's been in the news, but it hasn't gotten the attention it should. 6 of the 10 commissioners of the 9/11 Commission are on record saying the Pentagon has been involved, one of them used the term, in a criminal cover-up, and that we were lied to by the Pentagon and the White House. And then along comes a colonel who is not corrupt and backs up that information, and they're trying to suppress your book, when a lot of what's in your book, I've now had a chance to read most of it, has already come out in pieces and been confirmed in other declassifications, other books that have been written. It's just that you put it all together and have a conclusion that they don't like.
I think it's absolutely correct. I think when you put the totality together, you start seeing a picture emerge. And this is one of the things, the Army, God bless them, were very good about forcing me during the initial review. And let me be very clear here. There is a lot of information that was truly classified regarding things I did in Afghanistan that we cannot talk about because it is truly classified. With that said, the Army made me source everything. I actually hired a researcher who went through and found open sources of pretty much everything in the book. And my objective here, Alex, was not to reveal secrets, but was to create a narrative, a true narrative that showed factually what happened, what went wrong, and not only regarding the Able Danger thing, but the larger war in Afghanistan, why things have gone so badly wrong there. And the last chapter, which you'll see in the book there, is the path to victory, where I actually sat down and worked on coming up with reasonable courses of action for the future. To include, I went to Ireland, did some original research talking to folks in Northern Ireland regarding the Irish peace process.
And that's probably what they really don't like, is that you're now trying, in their view, to quote meddle in policy when all that's really happening is they're meddling and things are getting worse and worse over there.
Well, and I think that's the problem. You know, when you, and there's been some huge mistakes here, Alex. Let me just say a couple of things for your listeners, which are obvious, but I think people, the press in particular, has not done a good job of picking up on. We announced the surge, and then we announced the 5 provinces we were putting people into. And I've always talked about, this is akin to, would you have told the British to tell the Germans, hey, by the way, we're only going to hit 4 beaches on D-Day, and these are the beaches, so just be prepared for us to hit on June 6th. We didn't do that. And then the other thing, when you start looking at the actual effects of what we're doing, this New York Times article from 2 days ago talked about us being able to basically just slicing up the Taliban, doing a great job of taking Kandahar back. Of course, it took us 6 months to do that. And Hamid Wali Karzai, the current governor of Kandahar and the Kandahar province, talks about by the way, the brother of President Karzai, president of Afghanistan, comments that, well, yeah, the Taliban have left, but we don't know where they went. Oh, well, of course not. It's like trying to nail, Jello to the wall.
Well, by the way, his brother is the biggest opium dealer.
And that's, I think, been very well reported on by a number of credible sources about the fact that, the reason that the drug problem is as prominent as it is not only because of the Taliban, but because of elements other than the Taliban, possibly, official elements being engaged in that very issue. And that's why that's one of the reasons you see the slippage at Marja. Marja was supposed to be the textbook example of how we're going to secure the rest of the country. And you and I both know, Alex, that's essentially stood back into chaos now. So when you look at the actions of how we've done things, why we're doing them, you've really got to ask yourself, and this is why it was one of the reasons I wrote the book, is for the American people to ask some really hard questions. What do we hope to accomplish when everybody, and to include President Obama, has talked about the fact that the real issues are not in Afghanistan, they are in Pakistan. And until we take those issues seriously, we will continue to essentially make no progress.
Let's talk about your plan. I mean, you've been there, you've been through it, you've tried to study the region. Your idea for ending this war in on good terms versus where you see things going. And I want to get more into the book, Dark Heart, and some of the things you can now talk about. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer is our guest. I'm Alex Jones, Infowars.com. Has the new best-selling book out right now, Operation Dark Heart, OperationDarkHeart.com. We're also streaming the live radio show in living video color at prisonplanet.tv. And I've got a host of subjects I want to cover with him. But summing up your experience there and now watching what's happening in Afghanistan and Pakistan, where do you see the war going versus where you think it should go?
Well, I think the one critical issue, Alex, that we've continued to not fully understand and deal with is the fact that the real insecurity of that region has to do with the Cold War between India and Pakistan. The Pakistanis are far more worried about the Indians and their nuclear program, and rightfully so, because anytime you have people on your border with nuclear weapons, you have reason to be concerned. With that said, Afghanistan's become essentially a smaller microcosm of proxy warfare, much like we did during the Cold War with the Soviets when we were facing off with them. Everybody else fell into one of two camps, them or us. And I think what you've seen here lately is the Indians, and for any number of reasons, attempting to gain some access to the Afghan region. They built a power plant. They've done other things commercially, and frankly, the Afghans have partnered with them on some things which have made the Pakistanis very uncomfortable. And so you've got things like the Haqqani network, one of the prime elements of the Taliban. And for your listeners to understand, the Taliban is not a monolithic, self-managed organization. It is a tapestry of sub-organizations, often of which have their own objectives relating to their own area of the country. We're talking about tribes which have been there for thousands of years, who will probably always be there in some form. So this is not a cohesive state. So the Taliban have been successfully, in some cases, co-opted by the Pakistani intelligence service, which I talk about in my book. The Haqqani network, in particular, has become a proxy for the Pakistanis to go after the Indian interest in Afghanistan, to include launching attacks. So the reason I bring this up as a specific is to illustrate the larger issue, the fact that we've got to focus not only on the Afghan government because, frankly, I don't see why we are focused on the Afghan government. We have a number of other allies in the region who are not democracies, and I cite for you the Jordanians and the Saudis, who seem to be doing fairly well as a government but are not in any shape or form a democracy.